All right, so we were talking about the theme for the year is finding our footing. And this relates to position, it relates to attitudes, it relates to opportunities that we have in the community, that we are not, one of the things that we tend to do when difficulties come is we tend to, which we need to, we tend to circle the wagon, so to speak. And we're going to be the kind of people who will circle the wagons and make sure that we're protected. And that's exactly what we should do in given situations, but also recognizing that our job is not to take care of ourselves. If we have an inward focus that is only an inward focus, we're not going to develop the way we should. And so we try to, with that inward focus of making sure we're doing things that are correct and making sure that we're hanging on and maintaining what we have now, managing the things that we have, we also have to have an outward focus, because that's exactly what God intends for us to have. And that if we get out of balance in that, then we don't experience growth. We, in fact, if we are inward focused, we're more likely to decline than to grow. That's not an opinion, that's fact. It's been that way for 2,000 years. When we start taking care of only ourselves and we start looking at our only us and maintaining me, then everything else gets put on hold and we get to experience decline, because that's natural. There's a saying that says, if you're not growing, you're dying. And that's true. It's always been that way. And so nothing that we think can change it. It's not going to happen. And that's the difference between managing, from one perspective, the difference between managing and leading. Managing just takes care of what we are, and leading tries to help us figure out what we can do in looking has an outward look. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. But in doing that, we need to recognize that this year is a unique year. It's not unique in every sense of the word, but it is a unique year. And what is unique about this year is that from the perspective of society, what is unique about this year? What is happening in this year that's going to be? Yes, we have an election coming up. Why does that matter?
I would have thought you were talking about the
eclipse. That's pretty unique too. You know what? Somebody said things don't really matter in society until an election year. And then all of a sudden the politicians get serious. They got 3 years of coasting, and they got a year. They got to convince us that they were doing a good job, or that they could do a better job, or whatever. And I'm not going to sit up here and talk about presidential candidates or anything like that. I will say we saw what happened the last election cycle, and it's going to be worse this one. That's almost guaranteed. And the reason for that is because if you look around, we can see how things build, and we know how things work. Our job is not to get into politics. Our job is not to get into telling everyone what we must do to vote, because while that's an important part of society, and I think we all should play a part in it, what is it that's going to turn this country around? Jesus. That's it. And we can say the same thing goes to the church, right? We get kind of in our minds that we're going to go fix the church, and we're going to save the church from itself. And there are times that the church needs a lot of help. But who is the Savior of the church? Jesus. And we need to have that kind of focus. So the more we can help people understand who God is and what He expects, the more likely it is that we can help people make the right decisions, the best decisions. There are always going to be people that don't want to hear it. But that's just part of reality. But as a church, we can present ourselves and present the gospel and help people to learn what it means to live life. Because the things that are happening around us are sometimes not nearly as important as we think they are. But anyway, in this theme, this idea of finding our footing, the first 3 months is about the pursuit of God. because that's what we're trying to do. We're talking about pursuing God and all the things that attend to that. And we've been talking about, in January, the focus has been spiritual warfare. So we talked about things that relate to spiritual warfare, what that means, how it is that we can maintain our integrity, and that we can keep our first love, that kind of stuff. And this week, it's related to spiritual warfare, is developing endurance through the testing that comes, because that's what spiritual warfare is about. It's understanding the tests that we're facing, and developing patient endurance as we go through it. Because we don't have any choice but to go through pain. But we do have a choice about what we get out of the pain and out of the suffering or out of the difficulties and problems. We get to navigate to a certain extent the decisions that we make, and the things that we do will help navigate us through those places, those difficult times, which we all have. And if we can have that kind of mindset, we'll be a lot better off. So painful situations over lengthy periods of time, they test patience, they test endurance, they test faith. And God allows these trials. He even uses them for His purposes. And so when we develop trust in God's ruling and God's providence, which we've talked a lot about, we talk about also His timing. That's a key lesson for how we can endure in times of trouble. And we can see that all throughout the Bible. So it's interesting, when I organized this in my mind, the year, as far as looking at the book of Revelation and the principles, the idea came to me that we should do this daily reading, incorporate it in, which is what we're doing. And the reason for that is because it helps encourage us all to continue with the reading. But I was a little concerned that, when we apply the principles to the reading, we won't see a matchup. But so far, it's matching up really well, and that's because principles are true. It doesn't matter what year it is. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. The same principles still apply. And so we're going to see that today. And looking at Joseph, talking about enduring, talking about understanding timing, that's exactly what this section reveals. In chapter 36 of Genesis, we have the naming of the family of Esau, which is really more history, but it gives us an insight into who they were and what came from, what different tribes and stuff. This is important for them, especially as Moses writing this, the Israelites going into a new world, into a new land, or about to be going in when he was writing this, because this is from Moses. It's good for them, the Israelites, to recognize the people around them and who they are, and this gives them some insights into Esau and the brother of Jacob, of course. And so you can summarize that in verses 40 through 43. He gives the names of the chiefs of Esau according to their families. And this would have been very important to them in their genealogy and their history and understanding of the world around them, which is very important for what they're going to do. Because the children of Esau were not allowed to go in and fight with them at first. They were told to leave them alone, and they were going to Canaan, which was not where Esau was. And then we have chapter 37, where Joseph has these dreams, right? He's the dreamer, and it says, this is the history of Jacob. It's interesting how that history is used, but this is history of Jacob in verse 2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So it starts off setting the tone for what this relationship is between him and his brothers. And when you have a brother, this would have been the youngest one at the time, and what would have happened to him? What kind of relationship is he creating by being a tattletale? Yeah, he's creating jealousy, he's creating problems and difficulties, and I'm not saying he did anything wrong, but this is this is what's happening. He gave a bad report. And it says in verse 3, even a qualifier to that, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. Where do you think that Jacob would have gotten the idea of that favoritism was okay when you're dealing with children? From mommy, yes. Mommy and daddy both did the same thing, right? Jacob was loved by his mother, Esau was loved by his father, and that, of course, worked out really well. Well, he didn't, generational things. It's passed on from generation to generation. We see the same thing. And what was the reason that he loved Joseph so much? It says here, because he was the son of his old age. So that's part of it. What else is the reason? Because of his wife. Yeah, because of Jacob's wife. And when that, of course, goes back to all the way back to Laban with the marriage of Rachel and Leah. And Rachel was the one who he wanted, but ended up getting Leah, and then he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. And so now we have she didn't have children. Rachel didn't have children for a while. And she finally had children. That was the last of the kids, except for the second one that she'll have too before she dies. But I don't know the timelines exactly. But we do know that Joseph was loved and cherished because of his mother, who died, and evidently after this or before this. I don't really know. Like I said, I don't know the timeline. But Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. That's verse 5. And he said, "Hear this dream. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." So now he's talking about his brothers bowing down to him. And he said, they understood that. They said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. They probably would have seen that as a threat. Well, I don't know about a threat, but in their thinking, who was the firstborn? Reuben. But if you have who was the firstborn of Rachel? Joseph. If you have a firstborn, that's the lastborn, that's born of the favorite mother, who is a favorite son, who do you think is going to get the inheritance? Well, it sounds like when he's telling them this dream, how would you take it? He's just rubbing dirt in the wound. Which is already a problem because they recognize his situation. But anyway, so this is why troubles come. And then he's telling Dad on them about something that they did, and that's making it even worse. And then in verse 9 it says he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "I've dreamed another dream. This time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." And he told his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So again, you're going to tell me that we're going to bow down, even his parents, we're going to bow down to him. And of course, when it's all said and done, his mother didn't because she was dead, but still in principle, the idea is here. And so when his brothers in verse 12 went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, Jacob sent Joseph to check on them. So he was hanging around the house doing whatever, but his brothers were doing the work out there in the fields. And so he went to find them. Finally, after a while, he found them. And we see here in verse 18, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They've had enough of him. And now they're away from home, a long way away from home, and it's the perfect situation. So they decide they're going to kill him. And they said, look, in verse 19, the dreamer's coming. Let's kill him now and cast him into some pit, and we'll say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. But Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And he said, "Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit, which is in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him." so that he may deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So they agreed, throw him into the pit, which eventually he easily could have died in there, but he may have had an opportunity. He may have gotten out, and Reuben was hoping he'd come back around and get him out at some point. And they sat down to eat a meal, and then they saw the Ishmaelites coming in a caravan, right? So they take him out. They decide to sell him. Reuben wasn't there for whatever reason. It doesn't say why, but they take him, they sell him, and Judah even convinces him to do this. He says, why would we kill our brother when we can make some money? I mean, that's basically what he said in 26 and 27. So they sold him for 20 shekels of silver, and then Reuben went to the pit later, and Joseph wasn't there, so he is distraught over this. And they decide to tell him to take Joseph's tunic. And by the way, I know this is incidental, but how would they know it was Joseph's? Or how would his father know it was his? It's the coat of many colors, yeah. This is the one that he wore that he was so proud of. So they killed a kid and dipped a goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And then they brought it to his father. And it's sly the way they did that. They didn't say, oh, look, your son's dead. They said, hey, we found this tunic. Is this your son's? Is this Joseph's? And they just let him come to the conclusion. You see this tunic with blood all over it, what's your first thought? This kid's been mauled and killed. And they see he's so distraught, but they just kept their mouth shut and let him suffer. Of course, what would have happened if he would have known? If it had said, we sold him to the Ishmaelites and they took him to Egypt, where do you think he'd be doing? He'd be going to Egypt, which would only make sense. So there's no way they're going to tell him that. They're going to go get it. It's going to be a problem even more. There's no doubt about that. And so anyway, this is what he is. Now he is set. Joseph is taken into captivity. He's sold to Potiphar. And then we have this interlude here in chapter 38 with Judah and Tamar. The timing of this being presented in this chapter could be because this happened right after they sold Joseph into slavery, but it also could be just simply illustrating the difference. There's a change. There's a difference between the way Judah behaves and the way Joseph behaves. Right. So Judah and Tamar, we have this interesting situation, and the Judah saw he went and visited a certain Adulamite in verse 1 whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite who was Shua. He married her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. He called his name She conceived again and bore a son, Onan, and she conceived again and bore a son called Shelah. He was at Chesib when she bore him. And then Judah took a wife for whose name was Tamar. And Judah was wicked, and God killed him, and he didn't have any children. So this was part of the custom of the day, which is completely foreign to us. Then the father went to Onan and said, you need to marry this woman and raise a child up for your brother, so you would have posterity. So the way that worked was they would marry, and the firstborn would be the brother's son, considered to be that way for inheritance purposes, that kind of thing. And so this is what he didn't want it to happen, so he managed to not impregnate her intentionally, and God saw that and killed him as well. And then in verse 11 it says, Judah said to Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So he's not taking any more chances. He's got one son left. And he says, you just wait for a while. When he's grown up and he's mature, I'll go ahead and give him to you so you can, in marriage. And she can have children. So what does she have to do? Why didn't she just leave? Well, she did. She went in her father's house, right? But in custom there, she would not have been allowed to be marrying someone else. She's held in reserve, basically. for this situation when, can you imagine? I don't know the ages and everything, but so you're married, you've been married twice, you're widowed twice, and now you're looking around, you're probably in your 30s, I'm guessing, and you look around and you say, well, here's a 12-year-old boy, I got to wait till he grows up so I can marry him. That's not a pleasant situation by any means. So now she's feeling all kinds of things, which I can't imagine. But he grows up, and then she's not married to him, and so she's been mistreated in this way, and so she goes and dresses as a prostitute, which is so many weird things going on here, and has intercourse with Judah, and becomes pregnant, and so he goes home, and he thought she was a prostitute, left items with her as evidence that he would send a payment, and she was then accused. She found out she was pregnant. She was accused of treachery. He said, take her out and we're going to kill her, because it's okay for guys to do it, but not for girls. Which is neither one of them is true. So they brought her out, and she said, well, whose stuff is this? And it was his signet ring and his staff. And so he knew, he said, you're better than I am. So he didn't kill her. When the application came to, well, maybe I should die because of my sin too, all of a sudden it's okay. But when somebody else does it, then, yeah, that's terrible. Isn't that the way life works, though? So when you do something really, really, really bad, that's so bad. But when I do it, it's really not that bad. It's the same thing with surgery, by the way. You know the difference between major surgery and minor surgery? Minor surgery is when I have it. Major surgery when I have it. Minor surgery is when you have it. That's the way we think. And that's what we're seeing here. What kind of character do we see for Judah? What's his character here showing through? Nobody wants to touch that one.
Hypocrisy is an easy word.
Huh? Hypocrisy? Yeah, he's a hypocrite. He definitely does not see people in the way he should see them, especially with women, and that was pretty common in that day. And here he is, he's not fulfilling his obligations, he's not fulfilling the things that he's promised to Tamar, and there's all kinds of bad things going on here. So it's fascinating to me to see how these people, as corrupt and evil sometimes, the things that they did, they were still allowed to be part of the plan that God created, right? So we can look at the people and who among all the generations, all the way to Jesus, who among all those people were perfect, God-fearing people? None of them, because none of us are. And of course, Jesus is the only one who was perfect. Some were better than others, yeah, but this says a whole lot about what God can do through us, and also kind of what he set himself up for. So he set himself up, and he put himself in the situation where he's having to deal with people who are acting like this and still continue to bless them. But what is the reason he's still blessing these people who are acting and living in this way? What's the basis of it? Yes, because this is all, it goes back to Abraham and the promise he made to Abraham. That's the only reason he's putting up with this stuff. And he's allowing those things to be happening so that he can bring about the Messiah at the end of this line, this lineage. So that's where we are. But then we come back to chapter 39. We got Joseph as a slave, and he is going to be in Potiphar's house. And what kind of character do we see that he has from the reading in this chapter? He's honest. He's hardworking. He's diligent. He is. How did he? What's his relationship with his master? It's a good one. Loyal. Yes. Respect. In fact, can you see that he was living for the benefit of his master? Yeah, that was his life, which is very different than I don't know how I'd react to be made a slave. I don't think I would necessarily think, okay, I'm a slave now. I'm going to make sure I work so that my master gets everything he wants, and then some. But he did. This is his attitude. So there's a lot of character here as a contrast to what happened with Judah. It's definitely coming out here when he becomes a slave. And it says in verse 4, Joseph found favor in his sight and served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put under his authority. All that he had, he put under his authority. So the only thing he had to worry about, it says that the only thing Potiphar had to worry about was his own food. Everything else was taken care of. And he was a manager for him, and increased and made him to profit because of being there. And there's lots of passages that we can think about. Look in Jeremiah. This is one that I ran across recently, and Jeremiah chapter 29. It's one of those things you read and read and read, and you can reread so many times, and you just don't see it. But Jeremiah chapter 29, it kind of hit me, kind of like a thunderbolt. And let me find the verse here. I have it written down in my Bible in the front. Chapter 29, verse 7. This is a letter from Jeremiah to the captives, or to the people who are going to be captive, telling them how they should behave when they are made to be slaves, basically. They were taken into Babylonian captivity. And look at what he says in verse 6. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, so that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there and not diminished. So he wanted them to make sure that they continued on with the bloodline, and continuing on, because this is a short time, right? This is 70 years. And that's all there was. It's a whole lifetime, I know that, but it's not going to be forever. He says it's 70 years, but you need to keep doing these kinds of things while you're there. And then look at verse 7. Seek the peace of the city where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray to the Lord for it, for in its peace you will have peace. That same attitude there is what God expected from the Israelites when they went into captivity hundreds of years after, actually close to 1,000 years after the events of Genesis 38. But they're told to have the same kind of attitude. Seek the benefit, seek the peace of the people in which you're put into. Does that have any application to us? What do you think God would want from us in our society around us, based on that idea? Yeah, improve it where you are. You sprout, you help, you seek its peace, and sometimes that means that we are going to get involved, we're going to get our hands dirty, we're going to live our lives in the best way possible. Yeah. Did you have a hand up? Oh, okay. I just saw the corner of my eye. So it doesn't mean that we have to run politics, but it does mean that we have an obligation socially as a church. That's the people of God have always been that way. And so, in fact, we see that in 1 Timothy chapter 2, that Paul said that we should pray for all the people, all the rulers. The reason we're praying for them is so that we can live in peace, that we can serve God in peace. And that's one of the reasons we can do a lot more than pray, too. We can get involved. We can help in the communities. We can do a lot of things that can help people, that will also help bring peace to them and to us as well. So, because if you remember what he said in Jeremiah, what we read, the peace of this people is going to bring peace for you. And so we kind of have a vested interest in the way the community operates and runs. We have a vested interest in that, not kind of. We have a vested interest. So the more we can help the community, the more we will be helped, and the more we will grow and prosper in the community and as a church. All right, so Joseph then has been here. He's there for a long time, and he's falsely accused. He's put in because, remember when Potiphar had a wife who really liked the way Joseph looked, and so she's wanting to have an affair with him, and he keeps resisting, saying, no, I can't do that to God. I can't do that to my master. No way I'm going to do that. And she catches him indoors one day by himself, and she grabs his coat and says, we're going to bed. And he said, nope, and he ran. So he left the coat in her hands, And as he ran, and he got out of there, and there's trouble brewing. So when Potiphar comes home, she's holding his coat and says, "Look what this man tried to do to us, tried to do to me, and bring reproach and shame." And so she accused him of trying to rape her. And so Potiphar took him and put him in prison. From what I understand, this prison was not just your ordinary prison. That's based on the language of the way that the jailer is described and different things. This is more of a prison that's made for political people. And we have different types of facilities and things like this. This was not hard physical labor penalty. This was a place that would be more fitting for political people, which could imply that Potiphar was an important person, and the scriptures say that he was. So anyway, so he's there, and what kind of attitude does he take on while he's in prison? The same, right? How does he show himself to be of good character? What's the evidence of that? Yeah, it's not long till the jailer recognizes, hey, here's an important person. Here's a person that has integrity. And the jailer puts everything under his control. The only thing the jailer has to worry about is basically he comes in, he punches in, and he's like, "Okay, Joseph, how's it going?" Joseph is running everything because he's a person who's trustworthy. That's a pretty amazing thing that he would rise in the ranks like that, and he did it fairly quickly as well. And now we have the butler and the baker come in. They have dreams, and they're disturbed by this one day, and they see Joseph is tending to them in whatever way that he does, and he notices that they're downcast. Now that to me is amazing. Here he is, and he's in prison, falsely accused, away from his family and home and everything, and he doesn't seem like he's going to be getting out. He has the attitude that, okay, I'm going to bloom where I'm planted, and I'm going to behave in the best way possible. And he is promoted because of that. And then he's looking around, and he sees two people who are depressed. They're down. And he thinks, I need to ask these people about that. I wonder how many other people he saw there that were not happy or down. I don't know if he did that with everybody or not, but here he is asking them, and they tell him this is because of the dream. So we have the butler who had the dream, or the baker that had the dream of the bread, and the butler had the dream of giving a drink to his master. Am I remembering that right? The dreams that they had. But anyway, he had the baskets on his head, and that's in verse 16. 3 white baskets, and the uppermost baskets, all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket. Joseph said, well, this is what it means. In 3 days, you're going to have your head removed. Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. Well, pretty nice one. But the butler had one, and in verse 9, he said, I had a dream, and a vine was before me, and the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And he said, these 3 branches are 3 days. And so Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. So 2 dreams, similar, but given bad things. The only thing he asked of the butler was to remember. So when you're giving the cup to Pharaoh, remember me and tell him about me, because I am not supposed to be here. And what did the butler do? He forgot all about him for a while, until there's an opportunity when the king had a dream. And then he remembered, I did something wrong. I should have said something about him before. And so he said, I know a man who can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh called him out, and he fixed himself up, presented himself before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh told him the dream, that is 7 calves, 7 cows that were fat and plump and healthy, and behind that 7 gaunt cows that came and actually ate the 7 healthy cows, and you couldn't tell any difference. And the same thing with grain, 7 heads of grain and gaunt grain came up and devoured the 7 heads of grain that were healthy, and he said, I don't know what's going on. What did that mean? 7 years of health, or 7 cows of healthy and plump were related to 7 years of what? Yeah, a feast, plenty. And so he said, you're going to have 7 years of plenty. You need to prepare so that because after 7 years, we're going to have famine, and it'll last 7 years as well. And so what you need to do is collect food while the good things are happening and put them in barns and places so that you can be ready when the 7 years of famine come. And Pharaoh loved the idea and he said, all right, go for it. And he ended up putting Joseph in charge. We're seeing a common theme here. The only thing Pharaoh had to worry about was his own food. Everything else was run by Joseph. Organized man, a go-getter, conscientious, loyal, and it shows then to be beneficial to him. As a result, then, he decided to collect all the money, all the things that, all the food, and store it up. And so when the famine came, the people came to him and said, we need food. And what happened when they ran out of money? They sold their land, they sold their cattle, and then eventually they sold themselves. Said, we'll be your slaves. And he owned everything, yeah. Pretty amazing. And they sold themselves to Pharaoh, and Joseph said, okay, well, now you sold yourselves to Pharaoh, this is what I want you to do. I want you to use your land. He moved them into the cities, but they had to go into the land and work it, probably moved them into the cities to help to take care of them. They went into the land to work it, and they were to take 1/5 of the proceeds and give it to Pharaoh, and they kept 4/5 for themselves, which would have been incentive to make sure they got everything they did, but they could use the land for free. That was basically, this is their tax. All right. Before that, he didn't own all those things. We're seeing here a time when Pharaoh became, who was very powerful, became extremely powerful. And this actually will kind of haunt them later, the Israelites later. But his power was incredible. It was unmatched. And so people all around the area would come to Egypt to trade so that they could have something to eat. And this is also where we find Jacob and his 11 sons, who are going to end up going into Egypt to get food. Then the brothers there see Joseph, and he sees them, and they have no idea it's him. He probably looks very different. He looks like an Egyptian. He's grown up quite a bit. I think it's somewhere around 25 or 28 years that he's been in Egypt. And he recognizes them immediately. And so he says, you need to leave one of your brothers here and go home and get your youngest brother, because in conversation they said they had a younger brother. He said, go bring him back so I know you're not spies. And at first he said, all of you are staying and one of you are going home. And then he changed it to one of you are staying and everyone else goes home. So they kept Reuben. Was it Reuben? And the brothers went home. And when they got home, they found out that not only did they have grain, but the money that they used to purchase the grain was in the top of the bags. He put it all back in there. And so they were terrified to go back. But they said, eventually they said, we got to eat. But Jacob, how did he respond to the news that they needed to take their younger brother, Benjamin? Not going to do it. Already lost one son. Reuben's basically dead because he's there in captivity. He's basically saying, yeah, Reuben, just stay there. You're not getting my other son. And so this is the situation until they got hungry enough, and then he decided to give in and said, okay, we can go back and take him, and if I die, I die. We're going to die of hunger anyway. So he went back, and Joseph then, through the situations you saw, he revealed himself to them, told them what God had done, and eventually ended up bringing Jacob and all of his family, and putting them in a land of Goshen, which is the perfect land for them because of the cattle. And then in Exodus, we have the rise of a new king who didn't understand who Joseph was. probably knew his name, possibly, but didn't understand him. And this is where we have all the way through where Moses is born, the suffering that comes to the Egyptians, that kind of thing. Didn't mean to intend to get that much in detail with this kind of stuff, but we'll begin this Wednesday going through the questions here, or you can go through them yourself and ask. These will help you to think through what you read, and hopefully, if there are any problems or difficulties, just let me know. Thank you for your attention.